Hello there, my name is Terry Bell. I'm the chairman of EU Property Solutions, and I welcome you to our webinar where we're looking at foreign property issues, but with particular reference to Cyprus in 2023, the here and now. What we're going to do here is just have a quick introduction. We've then sort of bit of a plan to the webinar, so the content that's going to be there. And what we're doing here essentially is updating our previous advices. Because as time goes on, so attitudes change, values change, etc. And as a gentleman of a certain age, I can also comment, as we get older, our responsibilities and preferences change. We've done quite a bit of work on our YouTube channel, so I would ask you that you go and have a look there. May not answer every question, but it helps introduce the team, and we know that you've been wronged along the way here in all likelihood, so we're just trying to engender that bit of trust, and hopefully you'll understand a bit about us more. And I say that's our YouTube channel for EU Property Solutions. So essentially what we're looking at here today is the current position at this point, because that's the only basis you can make a decision. So we're looking at the market, our opinion of the Cypriot property market, the banks and where they are. We're also delving into a slightly murky world of the Cypriot legal system and litigation that's going on, and something I've been going on and on about, and that is vulture funds as banks sell their non-performing loans to what are affectionately known as vulture funds. So that's our brief introduction, and now we'll get going in earnest. So these are the areas we're looking to cover today. So we're looking at the Cypriot market, let's say in 2023, and also how it's been affected by Brexit, COVID, etc. And there are a couple of interesting sort of features that we've come up with, and we believe market trends. We've a couple of examples here where one of my teammates, Michael, is going to detail a case that we recently settled. Plus, we've got a very interesting video testimonial from an actual client. And that gentleman is also available for a follow-up call in respect of how we dealt with his case and how happy he was on what was achieved. We're going to look at the difficult subject of Swiss Franc Mortgages. By any stretch, at that time they were missold, and some people still hang on to that premise. With respect, that doesn't solve the problem. We're going to look at the internal factors we referred to there on the actual personal nature of wherever you are in life at the moment, and we cover the difficult 3 Ds: death, debt and divorce, and different effects on different people. Hopefully you're not suffering from all three of them. Then we're going into a little bit more detail on the banks and where they are. Finally, on the technical side, we're looking at the issue of title deeds, and there's a simple graphic that basically shows all the moving parts to try and rectify. Still a big problem. Kindly, some of you have sent through some questions. I think there's 4 or 5 FAQs there, which I'm going to go through, and then a little bit of an advertorial. If you're thinking about trying to dispose of a problematic property in Cyprus, then please do try and use us. Obviously, I'd say that, but we just want to show what we can and can't do for people. Part of our role at EU Property Solutions is to keep abreast of changes, alterations, movement markets, etc. And part of that role helps us develop the tactics that we need to adopt against banks and or other lenders, such as vulture funds. So if we look at the property market as a whole, and we have a number of contacts in Cyprus, we believe that the market is steady at best. We seem to be attracting purchasers from a certain demographic, and COVID seems to have had the effect where very few young people are actually entering the Cypriot market here. So it is slightly restricted, but with that backdrop, there has been a slight increase. So you've nearly got a levelling out, and we don't see any material rise from where we are at the moment. So that is really the market overview, if you like. Brexit undoubtedly has had an effect with the 90-day rules, how we're actually viewed by the rest of Europe, and it takes a little bit of an edge off it. This isn't a political statement in any sense, it's how it's actually affected with the position that you most likely face. The value obviously is dependent on the type of property, the quality, the location, etc. But one of the still salient factors in Cyprus is that of title deeds. And it's still a very difficult subject to settle. We have methods and protocols with banks and or developers that can resolve this, but they take a lot of time, and a fair bit of intellect on our part and our barristers that we use. I'm going to come through to the legal situation in a minute. We only ever use barristers, not solicitors, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. Then we've got the values from where they fell to. Obviously 2008, 2007 and 2008, the world was flying, fell off the side of a cliff. We believe that leveled out about 2015, 16, but within reason it's flatlined since then. We haven't seen a material increase from the base levels. Yes, it's dependent on the quality and condition of the properties, and or there are a number of entries now into the new build market, which slightly takes an edge off the used property market, if you like. So it's okay generally, that's what we're saying, but a couple of effects there. We, for instance, would discount any property that's in, say, in a shop window by 10 to 15% to get to a real selling price. So it's a mixed message, I know, but those are the salient factors that apply when we're looking at property values in Cyprus in 2023. Here we have a case which my colleague Mike Withers is going to detail in terms of the numbers. But we had a gentleman here who had a tricky situation where he basically didn't have the title deeds. So this can only really be overcome at any speed if you use top quality legal teams. And we have those across Europe. We're particularly strong in Spain and Cyprus. And as I say, in Cyprus, we only use barristers. With that backdrop, we now have protocols that we work with the banks, and this was what happened in this case. We were able to apply a method, a tried and trusted method, to make sure we got rid of the property which had considerable negative equity, and that's not easy. It's pretty difficult, but it's pretty difficult, but it's what we do. So I'm going to pass you over now to a little video insert here from Mike.
How we dealt with a difficult Cypriot lender and achieved savings of over €110,000. Our client Richard owned a one-bed townhouse in the popular area of PAPHOS. After a while, it became more of a burden than a blessing. Now, being based in the United States, he found it difficult selling the property due to a lack of title deeds. To make matters worse, the mortgage term didn't come to an end until he was well into his retirement, which only added to his worries of repaying the mortgage back. With our help, we managed to negotiate with Richard's difficult Cypriot lender and developer. After lengthy negotiations, we managed to complete the voluntary surrender of his property and achieve a full debt write-off for only €30,000. This agreement saw a total savings of €110,000. Richard was delighted with the outcome that we achieved for him, never mind the savings. If you or anyone else you know that's struggling with a Cypriot property issue, get them to listen to this video or contact us today.
Hi everyone, Liam Cooper here. I'm the Senior Foreign Property Debt Specialist at EU Property Solutions. Today I will be discussing what a Swiss Franc mortgage is and how it can affect you and your foreign property. Swiss Franc mortgages were used to purchase off-plan properties at inflated prices, and many borrowers now find themselves trapped by these mortgages that seem to be growing even as they meet monthly repayments. Due to exchange rate fluctuations, borrowers were effectively taking a risk on exchange rate movements between their local currency and the Swiss franc. If the exchange rate of the local currency depreciates significantly against the Swiss franc, the borrower's monthly payments will substantially increase, making it difficult to meet their mortgage repayments. Negative equity and mortgage arrears have become exacerbated by changing exchange rates going against them, as well as the difficulty of dealing with foreign banks. The Swiss franc mortgage nightmare continues for many Cypriot homeowners to this day, struggling to sell and struggling to pay back their insurmountable debt. We've seen it all, from individuals trying to negotiate with the banks themselves to class actions in Cyprus. Despite this bolder approach, these individuals have been left worse off financially and with no positive results. At EU Property Solutions, we understand the complexities and difficulties of dealing with Swiss franc mortgages. If you have been burdened by a missold Swiss franc mortgage and need help alleviating the problem, then we can help. Please contact us today. Thank you all for listening, and I will now pass you back to our Managing Director, Mr. Terry Bell, who will discuss the next section of our Cypriot webinar.
Back in the day, let's have a little bit of recap how these came about. Back in the day, these mortgages, Swiss franc mortgages, were sold as a safe currency product. Okay, and it was worked on the premise that the Swiss franc is always brilliantly steady, which it is, but what it didn't account for was the depreciation, particularly of sterling and the euro, whilst the Swiss franc stayed nice and steady. So consequently, the value of the loan that you took when being redeemed from your own local currency shot up. I think it's about 59% on average the loans have gone up. Now, these were, I referred to these as an evil product. There were huge commissions at the time payable on these. There was no consideration at all from the client. And by today's standards, the big word being today's standards, is that these were missold. Some companies, some solicitors are looking to fight this. There have been a few movements in some cases there, but essentially you're not going to win on that basis, in our opinion. These mortgages were prevalent across Europe. We've dealt with cases in Cyprus, Poland, France, and Hungary, all of which Swiss franc mortgages were granted on various investment properties. But the graph demonstrates, as I say, that'll follow in a minute, where it explains how the currencies have struggled against the Swiss franc. It's almost too safe, and it had no account. There were no financial instruments that could limit any damage, and that's why I referred to them as evil. So have a look at the graph after this. Hopefully that demonstrates what's happened with the currency against what, as I explained earlier in terms of the market, the fall from 2008. And this is what ultimately creates negative equity, and in some instances this is quite sizable. Here is Owen's handiwork demonstrating how negative equity came about. So we have the instance where the Swiss franc rose in value, thus increasing the loan value, and then against that you've got the falling property values after the crash of 2008. And this describes and shows how the negative equity position arose. Over and above this, you may be paying some of that mortgage off, but essentially what you're doing is paying off the negative equity. Many people come to us still astounded that they owe so much versus what the value of the property is. This is further exacerbated if you have an interest-only mortgage because you paid nothing off. And that's when people start to get in financial difficulty as time marches on, where it's the ability to continue to pay the mortgage, especially if a bank insists that you go to repayment. That in turn sometimes causes arrears on a mortgage account, and this is completely another day's work. But typically Cypriot mortgages look to compound the arrears, and this is quite catastrophic if people are caught in it. This is a real genuine mortgage trap, not like we're experiencing in the UK at the moment. That's an incremental increase in interest rates. This is a compounding interest issue, and it can be brutal. There's no other way of addressing it. So Swiss franc mortgages are a real difficult subject to counter and deal with, but at EU Property Solutions, along with our legal teams and the banks, we endeavour to deal with it on the most cost-effective basis to help you get rid of a property that's in negative equity. As part of the introduction, I said that we would look at internal factors, and by that we mean personal issues that could arise that consequently cause an issue with a Cypriot property that you may hold. So we have a number of cases because of our demographic, where unfortunately one of the parties has passed away. As the law stands, and as the mortgage contracts deem, if one of the party dies, the mortgage to all intents and purposes ends, and the property has to be sold. This causes anguish in many ways. Obviously, the sad loss of a partner, a wife, husband, is bad enough, but the ensuing legal and financial pressure is not good. And you have to sort out, obviously in the UK, the estate of somebody who's passed, but you also have to do that in Cyprus if you own a property or any assets there. And ultimately the property is going to be sold. They're very sorry for your situation, but at the end of the day, that's it. And if a loss is triggered, that loss will ultimately end up in the UK estate, and consequently can absolutely undermine the wishes of the deceased's will. By that I mean, essentially, it may cause a €100,000 shortfall, and if the assets in the UK are more than 100,000, it has to be paid in full. Again, there are ways of dealing with this which we've learned over the years, and it hopefully gives you another example of the experience and technical knowledge we have around such difficult subjects. We often find clients as well that get into debt, maybe in the UK, and so consequently the Cypriot property with its mortgage is deemed to be a luxury that isn't afforded. A lot of people leave the issue and move on and just leave it behind. These things do not go away, and when I come to explain banks and vulture funds, I'll give you a bit more insight there. And I've mentioned already mortgage arrears, but as I say, they get compounded and very difficult to deal with. Another sort of personal issue that can affect your holding of a property in Cyprus is that of divorce. Now, I'm not a great lover of solicitors that deal in divorce because their job is essentially to rev up the situation, and in many instances they're not commercially minded. Some solicitors believe when they sort out a mortgage settlement, some solicitors think when they sort out a divorce settlement that is binding no matter what. If a mortgage is joint, both parties are obviously liable and required to undertake the terms of that mortgage. Just because somebody gets divorced and a solicitor in the UK writes down that one party is responsible for it, doesn't mean they are. Any bank or vulture fund will still see that their document, quite rightly so, takes precedent over any arrangement in a divorce. This is a very tricky area when looking at acrimonious divorces. Work can still be done here, but both parties have to engage. And if solicitors in the UK tell their clients that it's nothing to do with them, they're doing them a huge misservice. So the tricky areas they were just touching on, and it was literally touching on, death, debt and divorce, have to be attacked and dealt with because they only get worse. Here we're going to now follow on with a settlement that we achieved for a client, and the financial summary of the case settlement is at the end of the video. This gentleman is Mike. He was under the misapprehension he would lose everything, took some advice that was fundamentally wrong in Cyprus through a solicitor who wasn't well versed in the subject. Mike came aboard as a client, and I think you'll see from the video how, I wouldn't say happy, but satisfied in terms of the work that we did to extricate him from what was a difficult position and something that was weighing heavy on him. We're always aware of the problems that any form of debt can bring, but foreign property brings its own issues. So I'll leave you alone now, and here's Mike's video.
It was clear from day one, from taking delivery of the property back in 2005. All of a sudden, I seen the developers and the bank in a different light, and it got to a stage where, despite much communication, a lot of communication between all three stakeholders, including myself, I could clear there wasn't any future with the property. And it come to a point where, despite constant remortgaging and speaking to and getting involved with communities that were all in the same boat, and taking advice from barristers, we knew that despite all that, there was still no light at the end of the tunnel. We found as soon as money changed hands with them, they treated us as second-class citizens, really, with regards to any plans or attempts to try to improve the situation. We found that the bank were really, really rude and arrogant and ignorant with us. They just pushed us really pushed us to the limit. And the developers were kind of shrugging their shoulders as they do, and just saying, you decided to buy in Cyprus, it's your problem. And it was a problem, a big problem, which the bank and the developers didn't seem to care too much about. So speaking to a lot of different people, we were in quite a unique situation. I was actually working and living in Cyprus at the time. So from 2005 onwards to around about 2010, I was actually living in my property. So we kind of, the problems, even though they were being exacerbated whilst we're living there, they really didn't come to fruition until we actually left the property. But whilst living in the property, we benefited from, obviously, owning the property. So we moved back to the UK in 2013 with my job. So we had, should I say it, delight of literally living in the property and renting the property out. And when we come back to the UK in 2013, that's when things really took its toll. And it wasn't until my wife came across EU Property Solutions. For this day, we can't remember where we saw you. That's when we engaged with EU Property Solutions, and the rest is history. Right from the start, really. Initial telephone call. I can't remember who it was. A really nice chap. He really made us feel at ease. There was no pressure. It wasn't a precious sale. He allowed us and permitted us to contact, other people that were successful with EU Property Solutions. We felt as if, I know I hate to say it, but we just thought, are we going to be scammed again by another company? Because everyone we've dealt with just literally, want to just take our money, no real interest in what we're trying to achieve. But from day one, we felt at ease, and the staffing, the staff work, and the communications between EU Property Solutions and ourselves was enough for us to commit to them looking after our case. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I didn't really speak to a client that was based in Cyprus, but I spoke to a couple of Spanish clients that you had. Very, very similar situations, but having a pool of Cyprus clients will be of real value with you, and I hope that I could be of value to anybody. And as I said before, having gone through the process, being an owner, investing in Cyprus, and I'm more than happy to help anybody else in the same situation as ourselves. Yeah, my particular case manager was really on the ball. The biggest thing for me, the biggest sort of like breath of fresh air, was being able to pass all my problems onto her. When I mean pass my problems on, I mean I refused to part of the deal of taking up engaging with EU Property Solutions is I didn't want to communicate with the developers or the bank whilst I was going through this process. And EU Property Solutions, fantastic. They took on ownership of my problems for the whole period that they were looking, trying to fight my case. So one of the big things that I found was literally having an opportunity to forget about all the issues and the matters that were surrounding, knowing that it was being managed in good hands. Yeah, I mean, it was a marathon. It's not a sprint, so please be prepared for that, because the best, the greatest will in the world. These things, certainly out in Cyprus, take its time when you're dealing with all secret authorities anyway. But when we got told, it was a bittersweet feeling for the family, certainly for my wife and I. Don't get me wrong, we've invested a lot of money into the property, and we're gutted, and we're really sad that it all just went down the drain. But the sweet feeling is, we have got no more troubles. We that whole weight's gone off our shoulders. We can move on, move forward with our lives, and not feel threatened by the Cypriot authorities. And when I mean threatened, I'm talking the threats do come in of repossession of your own UK properties, etc., and assets, etc. So yeah, bittersweet feeling, but a huge moment of celebration, I think. Yeah, I would say across the board, doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a serious investor in properties. You've got properties everywhere, here, there, and everywhere. There are people that fall foul to the Cyprus, what I call scam, and I could call it scam because I have literally been scammed. So hold your head up high. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Doesn't matter how much debt you are, how many properties you've got. If you want to get out of it, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Cypriot Banks. What is the key? The key thing to remember here is that the current staff and teams that work at Cypriot Banks had little or nothing to do with the loans you took back in the heyday. They essentially just want cases concluded, although they are incredibly slow, and sometimes we wonder if that is the case. And the resolutions are needed because very often these cases are very complex. We keep up to date regularly with all major Cypriot lenders and all lenders that we come up against across the EU. We discuss thoroughly with our legal teams, and our barrister is on speed dial with some of the banks in Cyprus. So many banks still struggle to clear their books. A lot of that is due to the slow ineptitude systems they still have from back in 2008. And with that backdrop, what we're finding is that vulture funds are starting to get involved. And essentially, they're there to take what's called non-performing loans, and across they come to these vulture funds, and they are a different animal. Non-performing loans have to be dealt with by the banks now after the 2008 crash. There was a thing called Basel III, which says basically they had to tidy up their act. Any loan that wasn't performing had to be sold or discounted heavily. Nobody ever knows what they discount to or what they sell these loans for, but we know there's a discount. We know deals are there to be done, but be aware, vulture funds are not easy to deal with. In fact, I'd add they're a lot harder than banks. Whilst they have their desire to clear the matter up and get a return on their loan that they purchased, they're not regulated. On that, by that I mean they will take whatever action is necessary wherever to recover their money. Typically, banks aren't very good on a cross-jurisdictional basis, whereas vulture funds are. They literally work worldwide. In the Cypriot market, what we're finding is where these vulture funds aren't regulated, a number of pop-up companies, vulture funds, who are newly incorporated, new businesses. And that is slightly concerning because we've got no idea who they are. We eventually find out, but it shows the rogue nature, if you like, of the where the loan is, and you have to be very, very careful. Also, just recently, within the last sort of 6 to 8 months, we've noticed insolvency practitioners becoming involved. And I think it's almost like a veiled threat when they become involved, in that ultimately their work deals in insolvency, clues in the name. But it's almost like trying to give clients a rattle. We've now worked out their game and know how to deal with them, and they usually are pretty commercial at the end of the day. But it's a worrying trend, and we have to keep an eye on this. And indeed, if you ever get a letter from an insolvency practitioner or any solicitor or professional firm in Cyprus or in UK or Ireland, then you make sure you get the best advice. Following on from my favourite subject of Cypriot Banks, sad but true, quickly following on to my second favourite, which is the Cypriot legal system. My barrister my friend now in Cyprus often refers to it as the Wild West. Yes, there is a legal system there, pretty similar to the UK and Ireland's, but anything goes. And the Wild West element comes under the level and quality of advice that's given out there. And as a business, we have kissed many frogs to find the right teams here and in Spain, in France, and in Bulgaria. The system is, and I have to be careful here, but it's there to be used and abused, and trying to get any projection on how a case may pan out is quite difficult. But it's very important that we keep abreast of this and always offer proper advice and support during a case. So one of the instances we often find is if a bank has had enough of a client, they will quickly hand that case to one of their legal team who essentially aren't very commercial and are there for one reason only, and that is to run up fees. And that's where it's very important that we're involved along with our legal team. Our legal team deal with the technical issues, but we bring in what's called litigation management. And it's very important that we have the end in mind, because the solicitors and legal teams generally don't. They're looking for it to take its course, have their day in court, earn tens of thousands of euros, and with little or no thought as to where the client sits, including their client. So it's litigation management is a real strong point about it. So if ever you face any form of litigation, it's very important to address it and get, like I said in the previous slide, the definitive advice, because there's plenty of people out there who will there are plenty of people out there who will proffer their opinion, usually only based on what they can earn from your situation. Another key point to consider when we're looking at the Cypriot legal system is that judgments can be secured in typically Nicosia Court, the capital, and they can be transferred then to the UK for enforcement. It's very, very important to deal with the legal issue if it arises in the country of origin. If you keep it there, you can negotiate there, you can defend there, you can do whatever you want, but it needs to stay there. Many people are under the misapprehension that because possibly of Brexit, that may have also reinforced this view, that you cannot be pursued in the UK. The simple measure is that if a country is in what's called the OECD, cross-jurisdictional collection processes are there. Sometimes this can result in vulture funds becoming involved, and they are brutal when it comes to enforcing judgments, looking to secure charges on homes, etc. This isn't a scare tactic on my part. I just want to explain what can happen. Essentially, it's a case of attacking the problem, something I've said a couple of times already in this webinar, and that is what everything's about. Ignoring it, in fact, makes the problem ultimately many, many times worse. So it's very important that you use somebody who has the legal system sussed, for want of a better word, plus understands the commercial outcome, the risks, and possible consequences for you in the UK.
Hi everyone, Liam Cooper here again, and I'm now going to discuss how title deeds, or the lack of them, can affect your Cypriot property. Firstly, it's important to note that title deeds are essential to transfer property ownership, which means without them, selling your property can be incredibly challenging. Unfortunately, Cypriot lenders will not provide mortgages for properties without title deeds, which can severely limit your potential buyers. Essentially, you'll need a cash buyer to purchase the property, often at a discounted price. Additionally, a lack of title deeds or improperly issued deeds can make your property worth next to nothing. Now, let's discuss potential solutions to these challenges. Since being established, EU Property Solutions have dealt with a large number of title deed issues. We understand that many of these developers are no longer in operation and therefore not contactable, which makes obtaining completed title deeds extremely difficult. However, on a more positive note, we have achieved excellent settlements for our clients who struggled with the title deed issues. If you're having difficulty selling your property due to the lack of title deeds, we highly recommend that you contact us for a free consultation where our team will be able to review your case and advise of all the possible solutions. EU Property Solutions and our Cypriot legal team understand how the core lenders work and their processes to resolve these property issues and settle mortgage debts. Subsequently, we often avoid sales procedures and assist borrowers with alleviating their Cypriot property debt burdens, especially when it comes to title deeds and the Swiss Franc Mortgages. We understand that these challenges can be incredibly stressful, but we're here to help you find a solution that works best for you. Thank you for listening. I will now pass you back to Terry, who will be discussing the next section of our Cypriot webinar.
Title deeds, another real sort of hairy, scary subject. When I first went to Cyprus about 8 to 9 years ago, I was amazed when I looked in estate agent windows and saw in bold letters, in capitals, that title deeds were available, as though it was a special feature. If we go back to the issue here, the graphic I'll come to in a minute, but if we go back, a little bit of a history lesson here, if we go back to the crash, there was so much going on in terms of build work in the run-up to 2008 that the legal processes to effectively produce title deeds was put on the back burner. When everything went wrong, including the developers and banks, they didn't catch up with it either. And in some instances, developers use this as a tactic against the bank and or the client involved. It's something that should have been resolved. The IMF looked at this in 2012 when they came in and bailed out Cyprus. And one of the conditions was that the land registry got its act together. I don't know what the percentages are, but it hasn't changed materially from the bad days and so we still have a number of clients who approach us who don't have title deeds. And the effect of that obviously is that the price gets affected. So we have this brief graphic, and what we're saying here is that you need to look at all the moving parts. And with that, I refer to our protocol with banks and or developers. We can do this. I'd suggest we're the only firm that can bring this to the party. So land registry, essentially similar to the UK registry, should have full title details, but if the deeds haven't been prepared, they can't. You have the developer who would have undoubtedly suffered a lot, went and crashed, so they're not here anymore, which causes its own issue. We've recently got a case there. We've got a number of properties on a development where we're having to essentially instigate some sort of fraud proceedings to bring everyone to the table. You've got the banks, obviously, they're hanging around. You've got the local councils around, and last of all, you, the dear customer. You're always last. Our approach is to bring these parties to the table and to get the bank essentially and the developer sorting themselves out, whatever that form that takes, so that we can then consequently get a settlement with the bank. Over and above that, you've got the local councils, which were absolutely shot back in the day, looking for the handout to make sure they register everything locally and correctly. What's very difficult here is to get everything aligned. That diagram suggests it should flow quite easily here, but it doesn't, especially when you've got sites that have multiple units on it. So if you've got a sort of development, say with 20 villas, if you've got an apartment block, it becomes quite tricky to resolve because you've got to look at every element on that example I gave you there of all of the 20 properties that are there. So it's a real bugbear of the banks, but accordingly, it's a situation that can be resolved once the client shows the desire to get rid of the property. That's the key driving factor here. If you feel you can't sell or can't sort the matter out because you don't have title deeds, it can be done. It's not easy, but it's something we specialise in, again, along with our barristers in Cyprus there. So as part of the promotion of this webinar, we've been asked a few questions, and we give you some details at the end how to contact us. And if you want a free bit of advice from this webinar, you're very welcome to email us and we'll come back to you on it. If it goes further, obviously we would look to charge, but as it will give short advice and or point you in the right direction if you need it. So there's one that came through there, obviously following on from the previous slide. You can sell a property without the title deeds. Okay, it has to be advertised on that basis, and you will undoubtedly get a lot less than, say, the true open market value if a set of deeds did exist. That's because you attract a certain type of buyer. Somebody's got to take a view. They're only going to pay cash. They won't be able to get a mortgage, obviously, because it's not registered property, and so consequently, you can do it, but the price gets whacked. Now, properties can be disposed of through our process if the deeds aren't there. Ultimately, that's what we're looking to do there. So we're looking to get all the interested parties together so that we can get our client out of the situation there is, and effectively that's a sale. But if you're looking to sell without deeds, you're going to take a whack on the price. We're looking at also there at the bank, and also possibly a question there about missold mortgages. By the traditional old standards, indeed, there was some skullduggery, would be the politest phrase. Now it won't hold credence or credibility with the courts. They've had enough of it. They get very bored with Johnny Foreigner moaning about how badly he was treated, etc. And it's not going to resolve itself. The legal system I briefly touched on there. I don't want to go too much into that before I get myself into trouble, but it's not easy. A lot of people still are hanging their hat on the fact that if they complain enough, then it will resolve itself over time, and it will be deemed to be missold, and the fairy at the end of the garden is going to write off the debt for you. It's not going to happen, in our opinion. There are a number of ongoing case studies, and I would love to be wrong. If you're looking to deal with it now, we're here to help. The next question follows along the line of a letter from a debt collector, and this is again becoming more prevalent in terms of being chased in the UK. Repeating a comment I made earlier, in the UK you can be chased for any debt worldwide on the proviso that country is in the OECD. A lot of people decide, because it suits their argument, that Brexit will save them, that a bloke at the pub said they can't chase you in the UK, etc., etc. Over time, this gets worse and more aggressive chasing happens, and consequently you will get debt collection letters. If you do get one of these letters from whoever, it's a case of, like you keep saying, attacking the problem, whatever it might be. Engagement is good, but it has to be the right engagement. Another question here is, what is the current process for buying a property in Cyprus? Do you need to have a property lawyer? Absolutely, and a good one. If you are looking to buy a property in Cyprus, it's no charge. Okay, please do contact us, because we'll point you in the direction of a good property lawyer. There are plenty of bad ones, not just in Cyprus, in Spain, France, wherever. Okay, there are good and bad property lawyers. Absolutely, you need one. You need to know exactly where you stand on everything, especially that going back to that thing of title deeds in the land registry. You must make sure that the detail is 100% correct. Ultimately, you will be disposing of this property one way or another, when you pass, when you sell, whatever, and it'll be a lot easier if you've packaged up the correct situation on the property you're looking to buy. I'm also asked there, can I hold the bank accountable for my missold mortgage? Missold by today's standard, undoubtedly. If you took a mortgage back in 2008, Swiss Franc Mortgages, etc., etc., none of these would have been allowed back in today's world. But your chances of getting any sort of accountability, by that I assume you're looking for some sort of write-off or whatever you're going to look at. But very, very unlikely, hugely costly, very difficult to follow right the way through. Those are a few questions there. If there are any others, do come through and ask away. We've got a friendly email address there, hello@eupropertysolutions.com. We're on the phone there. I think also there's a live chat facility there if you've got a question. And don't think you're alone here. In terms of this webinar and the questions you ask, all answers will be free. If you want to go further and dig, then obviously we'll have to talk about possibly you're employing our services, but we will give you the insight to your particular situation. So we've given you hopefully a bit of an insight as to the Cypriot property market and also the issues that arise. Some of them have been there since time began, but we're getting through them. We have a number of clients through these difficult situations. One of the key features of what we do is that we understand litigation and what's involved, even if you're not party to it, but it's threatened. It's knowing how that's going to pan out. I'm going to run through a couple of, so this is about us, right? But go with us because I think it's quite important. I'm trying not to do it as an advertorial. I'm trying to explain the sort of skill set we bring to this and why we're pretty good at what we're doing. As we always say, don't try this at home. So if we run through it, right? We've got over 20 years experience in property debt, no matter where it is. We've dealt with issues in New Zealand, America, Canada, Hungary, France, Poland. And within reason, it's the same principles that apply. And in all instances, it's dealing with a situation in the country of origin. As I said before, we've kissed all the frogs. We've gone through bad solicitors, good solicitors in different ones. Now we have legal teams. As I said, in Cyprus specifically, we use barristers because they're further up the food chain and their advice is definitive. Everything is 100% confidential. We had a case where a lady unfortunately passed away. She hadn't told her family in terms of the property she owned in Cyprus, and it was a tricky case, but we were 100% confidential with the relevant family members as to on that issue. Very importantly, bilingual team in the various countries we work in. On that, sure, you can get translators, but it's very important to understand the commerciality of what's being discussed. And you could get things, you could Google Translate, whatever other apps and AI devices are available, but it's the context of what is being said that's more important. We have any number of referrals. As I said quite early in this webinar, we know it's about trust. We know you feel wronged, and we want to get across what we've done for clients. There are some of the clients that have kindly given up their time and done a short testimonial for us. We're doubting at the beginning of the process, but through it, we got through it. The YouTube channel, there's quite a bit of information on there. I'd hope there is, because it costs us quite a bit of money and time to develop. And it gives you, again, a little bit more specific insight, possibly to an area you understand or your position, the position you face. And we've got an ebook that we're going to send to you just by way of information. It's talking around the whole subject that we cover, rather than just saying specifically on Cyprus. But there is a section on in Cyprus there. So that's going to be me. Thanks for watching. It's a little bit. It's a deep subject. I'm quite sad that I could go on for hours, but I'm mindful I want to try and keep it relatively short and sweet. Any issues arising, there's our contact details. And the team are here. If you want to discuss anything, say anything directly from this webinar, 100% I'll do that for free. And if it goes further than that, obviously we'll tell you. But thank you for your time. Hopefully it's been of some use. And don't forget to check out those testimonials of ours.